G'day, I'm Mark from Self-Sufficient Me. Sit back, relax and enjoy me in the garden getting into it. Let's get into it. Well, it's corn season here in the subtropics. Last month of spring coming into summer when it rains a lot and it's hot and humid, and corn tends to love that weather. So I'm going to sow some. About 8 rows is what I'm putting in. 4 different types of corn is what I'm going to grow. And plus on the other side there you can see I've got some seedlings in. I got those seedlings already raised from the markets. I didn't raise them myself. I normally would, but I've given myself a little bit of a head start here. A little bit like insurance in case my later crops don't work out so much. And we'll see how they go. I always sow my seed really thick to start off with, just in case of failures. If I can sow them really thickly, I know I can thin them out. If I sow them quite thinly and be frugal with the $2 packet of seeds, well then, at the end of the day, what can happen is you don't get enough coming up, and then you've got to try to rob Peter to pay Paul and try to oversow or try to transplant in, and that's no good. Over the top I'm going to put in this tomato mix, which is really just some sterile compost with a tiny bit of blood and bone in it. And I say a tiny bit because these bags are only $3.50 from Bunnings, and I don't mind using it instead of my own compost sometimes when I'm raising seeds or seedlings, because if I use my own compost, it usually has weed seed in it, and then that starts to compete with the good seeds, and I find that can be a bit of a pain. So if I throw a bit of this in, and it's got a little bit of extra fertilizer in there as well, but not too much for corn, that helps. I don't over fertilize corn at all. This bed I prepared earlier in the year, probably about 6 months ago, and I added a little bit of manure to the bed and I mulched it heavily. That's all that's needed. If you over fertilized corn, it's worse than under fertilizing it, because otherwise it just grows heaps and doesn't produce much, and it gets too leggy. Here's a bit of a parcel in the post. Got some capers, some runner beans and some red currants. The runner beans are the beans, they're actually not plants, but the other ones, the capers and the currants, are plants. I get a lot of, they're the runner beans there. I get a lot of my plants online now, and I can't remember a time when I got a failure. I really can't. I've got lots of plants online. They're really good these days at packing these things. They've packed them in wet paper to make sure they don't dry out, and as long as it gets to you in about 7 days, as long as you unpack them immediately, give them a water and start planting them, there's nothing wrong with them. They're generally all very professional, even the ones I get off eBay from just private people. So they're caper berries. They grow in the Mediterranean. They don't typically like a subtropical climate, but as usual, I'm going to be trying to plant something that's not supposed to grow too well where I live. For the simple reason is I've got away with it in the past. We grow olives here, and we don't get great crops, but we get good enough crops. So why not give it a go and see because we love eating capers, and I'd love to cure my own and have our own capers, organic capers. So I thought, well, a good place to plant them would be this rockery in amongst our ornamental plants. I've got to stake them because I don't want to forget or have my wife come along and pull it out thinking it's a weed. So if we stake them, we know that it's an actual plant and it's not something that come up randomly. But hopefully they'll grow okay. The soil's really free draining, and that dry sort of area might help. Speaking of dry plants, this is an outback lime, and my mother used to live out on a farm at Chinchilla west of here, and she used to say how she used to go along and get these exotic limes and pick them from, they're just native, and eat them how she loved them. So I tracked down one of the plants and I'm growing them, and that was a Yazoo, a Japanese lemon, which is quite bitter apparently, and that's a bush lemon. I like growing plants that you don't often get, and that's why another reason why I get a lot of my plants online is because you don't often get them from the nurseries because they're not that popular. This is an Endril avocado. I've lost so many avocados over the last decade. This one is growing quite well. I've mounted it up as high as possible. Hopefully it's a good spot for it, and hopefully, well, it's got about a dozen fruit on it at the moment. It's only a small plant, and this is the best season it's had so far. It's about 3 or 4 years old, and I'm hoping that that tree, once its taproot hits that clay, that there's enough above ground so that it won't die on me like many others have. There's a Nutella Plum. Speaking of exotics, that's from the Nutella region in South Africa. Produces a bright red plum. Look, and the plant gets about 1 metre high, 2 metres across. This is an unusual thing. I'm looking forward to fruit coming off this. It's a fruit of the Andes. A long name too. I'm sure there's a singular name for it. Golden fruit of the Andes. Got that from the Diggers Club online. And here, this looks like a pawpaw, but it's not. It's a babaco. It produces like a torpedo type fruit, similar to a pawpaw, but a bit smaller. But it doesn't taste nothing like it apparently. It's more effervescent and kind of sour. That's flowering already. I planted that about 6 months ago. They don't get very tall. They don't get very big at all, these plants. Only a metre or so high, a couple of metres high maybe. So yeah, next to it you got that Ceylon Hilberry. Not a great jam for, say, bread or anything, but terrific jam for cheese. And I've done a video on that if you want to check back through my list, or I'll put a link in the description below. Makes an excellent cheese jam, a bit like a quince jelly. Next to it I've got that curry, I forgot the name of it. It's just a curry leaf plant. Use it in Indian and Asian cooking. So I'm going to plant the last of my caper plants mounted up here. Just filling the gaps in this garden bed using that mulch from that I got yesterday from the corn that I planted, and some extra mulch from the trees, wood chip mulch that I've mulched up. Love using a lot of mulch. And we'll plant that little fella there and see how he goes. Because it's mounded up and it's really free draining and it can get fairly hot there. It gets sun most of the day. We'll get a bit of shade from that apple. In that case I watered it in with a little bit of seaweed. In the other bed I didn't because I'd already top dressed that bed a few months back, so I didn't really need any extra fertilizer there. Here we got another native that I'm going to plant in another obscure part of the garden. I did have an avocado growing in this spot. This one here is this native black plum. Supposed to be a bush tucker plant. And that hole there, I did have a feijoa in there, pulled it out just before, and I had an avocado before that. Both plants didn't do too well, so I don't think the position's too bad. It still gets a bit of sun. It's fairly sheltered, but it's very dry spot, and underneath is really hard clay. That's why I mounted it up for the avocado. But hopefully this native here will grow a lot better, and the native plant doesn't mind a little bit of shade. So we'll see how that goes, and hopefully I can fill in that gap in that corner of the yard. Again, using a bit of mulch to mulch it in, and I'll water them all in well, and I'll keep them watered for a good month or so until it takes hold and you can see it shooting, and then I'll know it can maybe survive on its own, hopefully. I've got a big mixture, or we've got a big mixture of fruit trees. Exotics through to just standard citrus and other trees. They're not often grouped together. Sometimes I group a few of them together, like the mangoes I've grouped in a line. Some of the citrus are in a line, but generally I just plunk trees in willy-nilly. I like the diversity of that. That's a pomelo, the biggest citrus in the world. Looking forward to that. That's going quite well. Then you get some failures like this one. That's a gojo berry. I planted that last year. Not looking great. Hopefully it'll come good. That's a star fruit. That's going quite well. Then I got this little fella here off eBay. And look at that. Fruit's already starting to form. I think that's about 12 months old, that plant. It's a seedling. And, you know, a little lychee off a person who grew it from seed on eBay. And, you know, you got a small tree like that. Obviously, that's going to turn into a good tree if it keeps fruiting so early. I got that from the nursery, black sapto, and that's flowering too. That tree there's only been in a year and a bit maybe. So we'll maybe get a taste of what the fruit's like already off that one. And then I've got this. I got this from a local nursery, a soursop, and it's not doing great, but it is deciduous. And the way you can tell if the tree is dead or not, I mean, I just snapped the top off there because it's brittle and it looked like it died off the top. But if you really are not sure, go down a bit and scrape the stem, and if it's a little green underneath and moist, the tree's still alive, and in this case it is still alive. So I'm just going to give it another chance, and I won't just pull it out. I'll leave it in there for a bit longer. That's another exotic seedling that I got off eBay. Those scarlet runner beans that we saw earlier, I'm going to plant them in here, and this is my next project. I've had this tunnel as part of the veggie garden. That was one of the first things I built when we got here. And I grew tomatoes and all sorts of things along here, and Madagascar beans. But you can see that raised garden bed really isn't raised. It really needs to be raised up, so I'm going to put 2 more layers of boards on that, and then I'm going to cover the top. Here at the back of our place, we've espaliered a couple of olives, and there's another little gap there, and I'm going to whack this little bush tucker bush in there. It's got some edible berries, a medium. Black skies coming in. But the olive off the back of the house and espaliered, and we got a kilogram of olives off that tree last season, and I'm pickling them at the moment. The old Greek way, pickling, fermenting them. And between the 2 olives, we've got this bay leaf tree. This bay leaf tree travelled with us from Victoria in 2003 when we left. And yeah, we planted it there. We just didn't want to get rid of it. We've had it since it was a seedling. Beautiful tree, and use it all the time in cooking. So I'll just get some of those branches out of the road, just zip tying them to that trellising board, and give me a bit of room, prune a bit off, and have some room there for that small bush. That bush only gets a couple of metres high apparently and across, but it'll fill in that corner nicely, and it'll be another little edible berry that we can use in jams or just to eat fresh, high in vitamin C. And then there's this Burdekin plum, supposed to be a really good, bush tucker plant cross ornamental. So doing both purposes. And there's another gap there in our garden that I want to plant that tree in to fill that gap in, but it's raining. So that was the end of me for that day. See how we've got that grape growing at the back there of the ornamentals. I really do enjoy interplanting. The ornamentals with the food plants. They really do mix well together. You got the rosemary either side of the pathway that you use in cooking, but it also smells nice and looks good as you walk past. Those banana trees, I found 2 of them just as seedling bananas near my son's school, just in the bushland, and near a railway track, disused railway track, and I pulled them up and planted them, and we got a couple of good bunches of tomatoes, because that tomato bag of bananas out of those trees. It's a nice way to end the day, actually, just watching the rain come down. You can see how green it is. We've had such good and scattered rainfall through the end of winter, into spring, and now into summer, and the garden is just loving it. Really beautiful. Yeah, you wouldn't be dead for quids, would you? Nature, what a wonderful thing. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. The rain has actually stopped, which is a good thing, but it's too late now for me to finish off my planting. So I'll do that tomorrow. All I wanted to do with this video was do a voiceover and show you guys what's been happening around here over the last few days, and hopefully inspire you to maybe think about planting in your ornamental garden or around somewhere that's still appropriate for fruit trees and fruiting shrubs according to how they grow, but maybe filling a gap here and there instead of with another ornamental, perhaps something that you can benefit from and that can produce food. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now.